Hello everyone, today we're taking a look at the Eachine E017, and you would probably consider this a toy drone, but this is much more than that, for many reasons. 6 years ago, I reviewed the Eachine 010, a little story time here, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted to review this. I reviewed like I said, the E010, and it was, and probably still is, one of the most viewed videos on this little old channel. Almost 200,000 views. I need 3,000 of you to go back and watch that old video, 6-year-old video. Link in the video description. But it was revolutionary at the time. So before that, the only way you could get a whoop and you could fly, inside was to buy the Horizon Hobby Inductrix. And it was the same form factor, but they were the only company doing that, and it was fairly expensive, and they really didn't expand it in any way, make it better in any way. It took them years to do anything, kind of ignored the whole FPV community for the longest time. And Jesse Perkins, Mr. Tiny Whoop himself, he fell in love with the little guys, and he put a all-in-one VTX and camera right on top, and we're going to do that in this video as well. And so that spawned his love of micros and tiny whoops, and many of you would call him Mr. Tiny Whoop. I would as well. And there was one other person that I wanted to kind of bring up at this point in time. Dr. Benedict Hacht, I think is how you pronounce his name. German who was living in Australia during the time I was watching his videos and he was making videos. He also really loved the micros, and he sold some of the best brushed motors in the industry, and I think that's probably what he was most noted for. And he also did some heavy testing when it came to motors and radios, and he had his own shop. He sold My Lipo batteries, which was one of my favorite batteries for the long time. They're a little bit more expensive, and they're still good batteries. But those were two people that really had a big influence on me, not just in micros, but kind of in my RC or quadcopter and FPV journey. And so I wanted to have a little story time before we got into the nuts and bolts of this. And I wanted to thank those two because I spent a lot of time watching Jesse's posts, visiting his tinywhoop.com website, watching Dr. Ben's content, and enjoyed that quite a bit. And so I think I owe them a debt of gratitude, and I think we all kind of should appreciate what they did for this hobby much more than we probably do. But back to this. So this is what we get in the box. Get a fairly decent manual, 2 batteries, as I said, a little remote control, which I oftentimes refer to as Peanut. It's more shaped for smaller hands, you might say kids' hands, but obviously I fly it in this video, so you can see it. I used it, so you could too if you have adult-sized hands. And then we have the quad. Remember, these are brushed motors, so they wear down over the course of time. Flights, they have limited number of flights. The performance will slowly degrade. At some point in time, like I said, you'll need to replace those. Pretty simple, just plug them in, push these out, kind of like this with your fingernails. If you've got some, just kind of shove it out of the chute, and then make sure, maybe take a picture so you can see, because it does matter as far as the orientation in the motors. Make sure they spin the correct way and get flight out of it. Of course, it's got LEDs on both ends, so you can help tell orientation, although I wouldn't say it worked great for me. Okay, a couple of things that I'm going to show in the video. Of course, I'm going to try to show you as much as I can. On-off button, rotating, which is actually to rotate like this. It spins it, kind of a fun novelty thing. Then we've got headless mode, and we've got return to home. Return to home just kind of heads in the general direction that it came from. It may work, it may not work. It's definitely not one of those things I'd rely on if you're a long ways out and you can't tell which way your quad is pointed. Just get it down and go get it. These are kind of made for inside, so we shouldn't be terrible far away anyways. Then we've got a 3D flip button. Press that, give it some direction with this right stick, and it flips in that parent direction. You'll see that displayed in the video as well. The headless mode, that's kind of another fun little trick, and you'll see me do it in the pre-recorded flight. It means that regardless of the orientation of the quad, that this is always away from you, so the quad would go that way, and this is always towards you. So regardless of how the quad's pointing, it's going to go whichever the direction of the stick is. For those that aren't familiar, that isn't necessarily the case because one end of the quad is definitely the nose and one is the tail. So if you're not in headless mode, we need to use yaw and roll in order to coordinate our turns. I'll do that a little bit in this video as well. Of course, we are going to, like I said, add the Eachine TX06, which is a tiny little camera, and we'll get to that here in a minute. Oh, the last thing, you can't hardly see it in the line of sight video, but to trim it, you press this left stick and you hold it down, and then you give it kind of clicks in the direction you need to trim it. You'll see me do that. I don't do a great job of displaying it while I'm flying at line of sight, but you'll see that it does work, and that my quad, which is kind of drifting to the left and to the back, I correct that by pressing and holding this down and giving it some right and some forward in order to get it to level out. That's pretty normal with these sort of quads, because it's always trying to fly level. It's always trying to keep itself level, so we have to give it some input to make sure it understands what level it is at. Got the jiggly hat cam out. You can see I've got the remote. We just turn that on, and then we're going to plug in our battery into the quad and set it down on as flat and as level surface as we can, so it kind of does its initial calibration as good as we can. We give it a little up down to bind it, and then a little bit up on that throttle, the left stick, and it arms the motors a little bit more. It pops up off the ground. Here's where you can see mine is trying to pull or fly back and to the left, and then I'm eventually going to get it trimmed out to where it actually flies nice and flat and level. In the background, you'll notice I've got the second half of the basement lights off, and in the background I've got a gate from We Bleed FPV. I'll be doing more on that gate here probably in a week or two or more or so. I've kind of been having that and having some fun hanging around that in the house. And I turned the light off in the back because after a couple of these line of sight flights, I kind of decided that it was easier for you to see the quad as it got further away from me with the lights off back there, so you could possibly see the light of the quad itself. Here I'm just kind of demonstrating that it has an altitude mode. It's kind of an altitude mode. You can see if you get to using too much pitch and roll in an aggressive manner that it does sink, and then you have to give it time to kind of rise back up. And in other cases, you have to give it a little bit of throttle to get it to pop back up to the level you need it to. So it does work to some fashion, but it's not like it's got GPS in it or something like that that's going to keep it at an exact height or altitude. I already displayed the rotation thing where it spins around. Here I'm just going to fly it around a little bit one-handed, kind of line of sight, to where I'm not coordinating the yaw and roll in order to make coordinated turns. I'm just going to fly it around one-handed a little bit just to show you that, yeah, if you've got a young person in your life, maybe you're looking at Christmas. Christmas is coming up. Or you just want to get started yourself. Hey, there's nothing wrong with this. I flew quads just like this for, geez, was it a year or two before we had... It might have been 2 years before we saw brushless whoops. It might have been 3. I might have my timing wrong on that. Don't let that gate in the background steal the show. I know he's fancy. If you're curious, head on over to WeBleedFPV.com, and they've got all sorts of whoop products. Zotek is a single proprietor, or I should say the owner and operator, single proprietor of We Bleed FPV. He's also got some hot sauce over there, sweet hot sauce. And you might want to give that a try. My wife and son like that hot sauce. I'm not a hot sauce person. This is where I'm showing the headless mode. You hear how it's beeping, and I'm giving it some yaw. And it's always, when you point the stick up, that's always away from you. Left is always left, right is always right. It doesn't matter which way the nose is pointed. Which is kind of a fun little, you might say, party trick. It might be an easy way to just have some additional fun. It's really up to you. I also display the 3 speeds in our line of sight video, but I think I go right to the third or the highest speed, and then I come back around to the second speed. And I'll show these speeds in the FPV view as well. I think in the FPV view, it might be easier to tell the actual speed difference, but maybe not. It kind of, it's very subjective. It all depends on your point of view. By the way, this is not a high voltage charge battery. It's standard charge battery, and it flies for almost 6 minutes in this particular case in line of sight. And we're going to, like I said, put that FPV camera and VTX on top here after this flight, and then we're going to go for an FPV flight as well. The FPV flight will be from my typical path. For those that are familiar with the channel, I usually sit upstairs at the kitchen table. It's a nice center spot to the house, and then fly it downstairs. And that gives you ability to see how this would fly from a different perspective. And also, if you're interested in FPV, but you're not wanting to make a huge investment into jumping in right off the bat, you just want to kind of stick your toes in the waters, $25. I did check on the original just to see by chance if it was still available, the Eachine E01. And yes, it is, but it jumped in price. That thing is up to $32. When it debuted 6 years ago, I think it was $15. I'm actually quite certain of that. So that makes this a pretty good deal, or at least in the fact that this is on one of those flash deals from Banggood. And Banggood's probably one of the only places you're going to find this because it is a Eachine is a Banggood brand. $23.99 on the flash deal. Says it ends in 8 days. Looks like the price goes up to $28 or $27.99 after the flash deal, but you just never know about these things, or at least I don't follow them closely to where I would say you should rely on that 8 days. If you're wanting to get this and that $4 less is really critical to you, then you're going to have to jump on the purchase side of things. But if you're a little bit more cautious in your purchasing and you're willing to wait, they could extend this flash deal. Who knows? And that price that they're saying that could be $27.99, could be more or it could be less after the flash deal. I have no insight into that. I guess is the genesis of what I'm trying to say. I hope I was right in turning off that backlight so that you could see not only the gate better, but the quad a little bit, because I know it's going to be hard for you to compare because I don't show you the line of sight videos I did with this where the light was on back there. But in just reviewing that footage, I felt it was really difficult to see the quad once it got much past the couch. And I thought with the backlight off, at the very least, you would be able to see the lights on the LED of the quad itself. And I kind of wish they wouldn't flash. I wish they would be solid on. I know they're supposed to be indicating stuff, but I found that, well, they're flashing all the time, and even when the low voltage cutoff, which means your battery has gotten to a voltage where the quad needs to land, it's flashing still. So they don't seem to change speed to me, so the flashing seems to be static. And there we go. We've finished our flight, and I'm going to go walk over to pick it up. Low voltage cutoff came into effect, and it slowly dropped to the ground. So we're going to take this Eachine E01. You can see I've got some extra wires there. Those really don't matter. We really only need to concern ourselves with the red and the black wire. Eventually I'm going to take the canopy off. Now you could have a multimeter and you could test those pads on the top of the battery to see which one's positive and which one's negative. I could barely read those, but I think it does say B plus and B minus. So plus is red typically and negative is black. Of course, we have seen over the course of long history that is not always the case when it comes to just trusting the wire color. I have seen more than a battery or two that came with reverse polarity. They were specific to a particular vehicle, and you had to be very, very careful. But in this particular case, I'm quite comfortable with that, so I go ahead and I plug in one of my stock batteries that does tell me for certain that these batteries that they ship with aren't reverse polarity. Otherwise, I would have fried it just right there. So I've got my soldering iron and everything handy. The first thing I will do is to tin up the pads on top of the battery there just a touch. Good idea to use some flux. It would be better to use some flux, but I have really never been one to use flux. So I have rosin core solder, so that tends to help me out, and magic in my fingertips, I guess. I don't know. But simply to get this set up and working, you just need the plus and the minus, and then we're going to put two of the other wires together because we don't have an OSD. So typically with your wiring, your OSD, you would have video in and video out to your flight controller. Of course, this is a very simple quad, so we don't have that. So we're going to take the blue and the yellow wires, and we're just going to solder those together to give us a video straight out of the camera, no pass-through of the OSD. And then the green wire is just going to be extra. You could snip the green wire off. You could make the blue or purple, I think you might even call that, and yellow wire a lot shorter if you wanted to. But being I could reuse this camera, I'm going to take some of my... I'm going to go ahead and leave it long and take some of my blue tack. It's funny that my blue tack has been around so long. It's pretty much gray tack, but it's out of the package. It's even kind of gray. Oftentimes people get blue tack confused for a product that is, oh, it's called something else, and now in the moment it escapes me. Blue tack is not all that blue, and there's a blue tack-like product that's very blue. Now that stuff that's very blue and is not blue tack, I don't like. It doesn't work as well. This ball that you see me using, I've probably been using this ball for a couple of years. It stayed pliable. It holds on to stuff real good. I use it for all sorts of different purposes, as you're seeing. I'll use it for staging stuff when I'm taking photos for thumbnails, or if I just need to get, instead of using a third hand, then I'll use some blue tack, stuff like that. So I find it very useful. I buy it from Amazon. The company that makes it is called Bostik. I believe it's an Australian company. Yay! And Blue Tack, BLU space TACK. I think there's another one that might be spelled the full word Blue Tack and maybe TAK or something like that. So anyways, so we did our testing to confirm that it's the blue and the yellow wire that we need to hook up, and the green is our spare wire. Green, if you're not familiar, would be for smart audio, which of course comes from a flight controller, but this flight controller does not have that capability. So again, that is extra. And eventually, I'll get the blue and the yellow wire wired up together. Confirm that I've got an image out of my little box, the Eachine EV800D goggles, which for a budget are perfectly good goggles. A lot of people are still using those goggles today. I keep my front half of the EV800Ds as my bench desk, and I have been using it for years as that bench monitor. I'm going to take a little piece of double-sided sticky tape, and I'm going to stick it to the bottom. You can mount it however you want to. This is just something I did. I think it's pretty similar to what I did years and years ago. Using scissors to snip off little bits doesn't work great. Side cutters work a lot better. So you might not have those, but you can get close with a pair of scissors if you don't have any side cutters in your household or wherever you might be working on your quad. Eventually, we get down to the point where we pull the bottom part of the foam pad off and we get the camera secured as closely as we can to center. Of course, we don't have a whole lot of camera angle, but this is a very much a beginner sort of thing. We're not worried too much about having much camera angle. We've got a super wide angle on the lens, so we'll be able to fly it just fine. Tie up and wrap up and pinch down the extra wires, and we're all set to do our FPV flight. All right, here is the view from that particular camera, and you can see I do not have my camera on perfectly centered. I'm a little bit more to the left than I am to the right. You're also going to note that, yeah, I need to calibrate or trim this a little bit. It's going to be pulling. You might not be able to tell that much. It's pulling to the left and back. I don't bother to trim it out. I just go ahead and take it off for a flight. I just kind of push it forward and push it where I want it to go. I wanted to give you this idea because I wanted to show this because I think it's really important. At least it's important to me. It has a nostalgia to it because this is, again, it was a pretty big deal when Eachine came up with their own whoop, and it really started us forward on seeing what others wanted to see in micros and quadcopters, and being able to tack on our own FPV camera and make these things do something different than maybe the manufacturer intended. I've also got my audio camera recording that has not come from the video transmitter. That is another camera I've got sitting there on the desk. It is recording the audio, so it gives you a sample of what it sounds like when you're flying around. And you'll notice me going up and down, and as I said, when you're pushing that stick forward at a heavy angle, yeah, the altitude hold works to a degree, but it can't keep up with the continuous forward flight at a heavy angle. Crash test right into the chair there. Great piloting skills. Gotta go pick that up because, yeah, no turtle mode on this guy. Just reset there behind the couch. We're going to take off again. And you'll see it's kind of herky-jerky, you know, because the quad's always trying to be centered. It's always trying to be level. It wants to be flat all the time, and so you're having to push against that to get it to fly in the direction that you're wanting. We oftentimes nowadays refer to that as horizon mode or angle mode, but yeah, it's pretty strong. You know, with a flight controller that we can configure through Betaflight, we can decrease that strength a little bit or turn it off altogether. Going down to the basement here, going to tumble all the way down. My flight skills with this particular kind of always self-leveling quad isn't quite up to snuff, but we make it down to the bottom of the stairs, and we're going to turn around and just go do a bit more flying. I don't know how important it is to see all of it. Oh, I've still got the gate up too, and the lights are on. Yay! But this was, you know, important. It was one of those things when I reviewed this. I remember it's weird. 6 years ago, I have this memory. It was so vivid. My wife had taken our kids to my in-laws' house. My wife likes to travel. She has a hard time relaxing at home, whereas I have a hard time relaxing when I'm on vacation. So she took the kids to my in-laws, and the quad showed up, I think, the day before they left, and I spent 2 days just charging and flying, charging and flying, charging and flying, charging and flying, and having a great time. And then published a review. It's one of the few times, especially at that time, that I was probably early, if not maybe even possibly first, to publish the review on this particular quad, and thus it became one of the most viewed videos on my channel. Last I checked, 197,000. I'll link that down below if 3,000 of you would like to go watch that video and push it over to 200,000. I don't think I have any videos that have gotten 200,000 views. I'm pretty certain this one is the highest viewed, or the original, excuse me. The E010 is the highest viewed on their channel. And for those diehards that are still here, I wanted to play. This was the last one. See, this form factor just kind of gets energized in some particular way. In this particular case, this is the Christmas version from a couple years ago. See if I can get my microphone to pick this up as it's playing the very strong Christmas music. Anyways, you get the point. I do suspect we will see something like this. I think it had a Santa Lego guy that went on top, but one of my kids probably has that. But this has been around for quite a while. This one won't fly as well, essentially because it's got that watch battery in there, which probably weighs 2, maybe 3 grams all on its own. And when you're flying little guys, any added extra weight, it takes away from its flight characteristics. But I just thought I would, because I still had that, and it's still, the remote hasn't changed all that much. This, of course, isn't the original. This is the Christmas edition of the Eachine Tiny Whoop, essentially. You can see where it had trim buttons on here versus where now you press that stick down and then you trim. And no headless mode, I believe, unless you press... I can't remember. Anywho, wanted to show you that for especially those veterans that have been around for a while. Some of you might get a kick out of the fact that I still have this thing, and it still works. Probably the most important part of the manual, and you might want to take a picture if you were to buy one of this. One is the calibration. So if you have the quad and it's sitting on a very level and flat surface, I mean level like in level to the earth, not necessarily level to a surface in your home. You know, put a marble on it. Does it roll off? If that's nice and flat, and you can just use that, you can do the calibration. Otherwise, I'd suggest trimming it in flight, that first few seconds in flight. And then you can also reset the course. The light flashes after complete of setting the flight is normally on. So a little bit hard to read on the instructions. Also the speeds, when I press the button down to increase the speeds, the 3 different modes, the 3 different beeps. Low is 30% by documentation, medium is 60%, and advanced, or the third beep, is 100%. And a last little extra detail as I try to string this video out as long as possible. Not really, but... so it comes in this manual, actually has 5 different language versions. That could be important because I know that not everybody who watches my videos speaks English or is in the US. So if you like tiny whoops, or you just want to get your start into drones or quadcopters, well, this sort of thing used to be $15 6 years ago. It's now $25, so a pretty cheap start. And then add this little all-in-one Eachine TX06 camera and VTX on top. Grab yourself some goggles, have a little bit of FPV fun. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise, please let me know in the comment section below. I appreciate your time. Thanks for watching.